A gente está começando a discutir isso no departamento, né? Como integrar isso no ensino e na assistência. Eu acho que é o futuro, o presente, como você colocou. Mas também eu vejo como um aliado ao médico, né? Eu tenho uma visão mais otimista disso, de que, como você falou, vai melhorar a nossa capacidade diagnóstica, nossa capacidade de seguimento desses pacientes. Acho que vai ser benéfico para o paciente, benéfico para a classe médica, mas acredito também, você envolveu a Sociedade CBO, eu envolveria até o CFM, isso vai exigir, né, das nossas lideranças, tanto profissionais quanto acadêmicas, né, de ver qual a melhor maneira de integrar isso à prática médica, de regulamentar, né? Eu sei que muita gente joga pedra quando a gente fala em regulamentação, mas eu acho que é importante haver regulamentação do que é atividade médica, do que deve ser restrito a médicos, e isso vai demandar muito tempo e muito esforço da sociedade de especialidade, dos representantes de especialidade como o CBO e principalmente do CFM. Eu não tenho dúvida disso, mas para o dia a dia, eu acho que vai ser a mesma discussão que foi com o OCT. O OCT vai dispensar a atuação dos glaucomatólogos. Não dispensou, pelo contrário, até hoje a gente briga, né? Se o OCT está dizendo a verdade, se ele está mostrando artefato, se é red disease, se é green disease, né? Acho que a gente vai discutir isso também com os achados da inteligência artificial, numa proporção menor, evidentemente, mas eu acho que vem ajudar, mas que vai trazer um grande trabalho para a academia e para os órgãos de representação, para regulamentação, para adequação disso para a prática diária.
Eu vou pedir, como ela vai entrar daqui a pouco, a gente tem 2 patrocinadores nesse evento, que é a Novartis. Não entrou.
Now it works.
Ótimo.
Okay,
now she's here. Well,
hello again.
Hey,
yeah. Thank you
guys
very much.
hear me?
We can hear you,
Yes.
can see you. Thank you very much for that. We're about to start. I was just saying that we have 2 sponsors today. I have to say thank you very much for them. One is Novartis. Novartis, they will present a very short video soon, just after your lecture and before we start our conversation. And Adapt also is one of our sponsors. Naama, please share your presentation and we can start as soon as you can. Thank you very much for the invitation, to accept the invitation.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we can see.
Let's see. Okay, I will move it to somewhere that I can see. Okay, now I can also see. Okay, so sorry.
Now we cannot see, sorry, but now we cannot see.
Now you can't see?
No.
Okay.
Just a blue screen. Now we can see.
Okay. But now it looks like I'm looking at you. Just move it this way. This should probably be a little bit better.
Okay.
Okay. So sorry for the delay. This is in part because of the Zoom and the Google computer. Okay, so thank you so much for having me. My name is Naama. I am a glaucoma specialist by training. And I work at Google on a team that applies learning to medical images. Some of you might have seen parts of this presentation before. I hope you're not going to be bored. And please feel free to, I don't know how you guys want to do this. Do you want to not stop in the middle for questions, keep the questions to the end? I mean, I'm okay if you guys are interrupting me in the middle, that's totally fine.
We can keep the questions to the end.
Okay, so this is my financial disclosure. Okay, and the thing I wanted to talk to you about basically are 3 things. first, let's start with some machine learning for medical images, some of the basics. I hope it's not too basic. And then I want to talk about some considerations in applying machine learning to retinal images. Specifically, what does it mean to train a model? And once we train the model, how do we know that it actually works? And then quickly go over 3 common myths in building and translating AI models into the real world. So let's start with machine learning. So you guys might have seen this before, because this is not new. I've used it a few times, but this is kind of a quiz. Everybody here is a glaucoma specialist, right?
Not everybody, but most of people.
Okay. So I don't need to explain. This is a fundus image, and if I ask you if this patient, or if you can see signs of diabetic retinopathy in this image, then most likely everybody can confidently say either yes or no, or at least feel confident about their response. But if I ask you, is this patient a smoker? Usually when it's like with live audience, some people say yes or no, and it has to do with the blood vessels usually. How old is this person? So again, usually the answer is somewhere between 40 and 60, because you can no longer see the sheen of youth, but also there aren't signs of old age yet, of age-related problems. But then, is this a man or a woman? And here, I mean, I myself would laugh if somebody asked me this, right? This is impossible. We'll get back to this in a little while. So whether we are aware of it or not, machine learning is already all around us. You might have seen this. This is powered by machine learning, so real-time translation using video or photos. This is machine learning, and this is self-driving cars, as it says. This is under very, very challenging and very, very complex real-world conditions. And this is machine learning, and Go is a complex game in terms of simple rules, but it gets very complicated because you can see that the board is very, very large. The world champion for Go, which is Lee Sedol, actually was beat by the AlphaGo algorithm from DeepMind in 2016. But machine learning is not just in complicated and fancy applications like self-driving cars, but it's also in things that we do on a regular basis, right? So text-sensitive email replies, translation apps, searching photos that are unlabeled using text, all of these things. But the best thing about machine learning is that it works not only in the hands of researchers and machine learning specialists, but also in students, even high school students can use machine learning and develop tools that can be useful in the real world. So what is machine learning? Very quickly, it's a type of artificial intelligence, and the key is that when we use machine learning is when a computer is trained how to perform a specific task without being programmed how to do it. So what does that mean? Or wait, before that, sorry, there are different flavors of machine learning. You might have heard supervised learning, unsupervised learning, reinforcement learning, a bunch of other techniques and names. Everything we talk about here today is supervised learning. So what does that mean to train a model without explicitly telling the computer how to do it? If we wanted to train a computer or a model to say whether this photo is of a panda or not, so using traditional computer vision techniques, we would have to tell the computer up front, what are the features of a panda? So it's a big white face, black ears, black eyes, black nose. And then we would tell the computer that up front, and it could apply those rules and say yes or no panda. With deep learning, which is a type of machine learning, all we have to do is give the computer the photo and a label saying this is a panda. And if we show the computer enough, or the network enough examples, then it will learn on its own, and it will pick up the features that it chooses on its own, but say yes or no panda after that. And the key insight here, or the key thing to understand about the beauty of machine learning, is that it is now easier to program computers to learn than it is to hard code them to be smart, right? So we don't give the rules up front. The computer figures it out on its own. So what does that have to do with medicine? And why does it make sense to apply this to medicine? Machine learning is very, very useful in situations where there's lots of data to look through, there is limited expertise, and the predictions are actionable. And that's exactly the situation we have in medicine, where with the advances of technology, the amount of data for doctors to look through is exploding. We know that there's a limit, or limited expertise, not enough doctors in the world, not just ophthalmologists. Most specialties are lacking doctors around the world on a global scale. And you know, you as ophthalmologists, we all know how images, OCTs, everything, all the images that we take actually dictate or help us decide what action we want to do. Do we want to start treatment? Do we not? And where we go from there. And let's start with let's look at the classic example of diabetes. We know that there are over 400 million people with diabetes in the world today, and this number is expected to grow to 650 million in 2040. So there's lots of diabetes in the world. There's expected to be even more, and all these people with diabetes need their annual screening. But we know that there aren't enough doctors to examine all these people, even not enough doctors to look through the images of the fundus of these people that are taken. So my team at Google, and this was before I joined them, unfortunately, they were thinking maybe we can apply machine learning or artificial intelligence or we can teach it to read fundus images and detect diabetic retinopathy. So they acquired 130,000 images. They built a labeling tool, and they recruited 54 ophthalmologists. And those images were from diabetic retinopathy screening programs, both in India and in the US. And they asked all these ophthalmologists to look through these images and give them a label, right, a grade or a score of diabetes on this scale, from no DR to proliferative DR. And many images were labeled more than once, and this will be important later. They showed all these images to the network, or to the deep learning network, and it learned to make these predictions. And it actually turns out that its performance was very, very good. So this is from the paper that was published in JAMA, and the black line is the ROC curve, the performance of the model, right? And you can see that it is very, very similar to, this is just a group of retina specialists. It was almost as good as these retina specialists. Following that, the team were thinking, well, we know that you can see the blood vessels in the fundus. Maybe we can use fundus images to predict cardiovascular risk score or risk factors. And I'm sure you guys heard about this work. I'll just say the highlight. Whoops, sorry. The preliminary 5-year major adverse cardiac event, AUC, so the performance on the model for that wasn't amazing, but 0.7 means that there is more than chance. So there should be signal in the photo to actually do this task. So from that same work, we go back to the questions at the beginning. The algorithm was trained to predict cardiovascular risk factors. One of them is smoking. And this patient was predicted to be a non-smoker and was actually a non-smoker. And what you see here on the right is what we call a, it's kind of like a heat map. It's, you can see the green U over the blood vessels. And this means that in this case, the model was probably actually looking at around the blood vessels. The green color is basically a graphic representation of the score of the importance that the model is giving to each pixel in the photo. And the overall performance for the smoking was, again, 0.71. Not amazing, but definitely saying that there is a signal in the photo. For the question of how old the patient is, this patient was predicted to be 59.1 and was actually 57.6. Again, if we look at the heat map, you can see that the signal is all around. Again, I want to highlight, I want to stress, this is for this patient, right? This doesn't mean that that's where the algorithm is looking for everybody. But the A's prediction was within 3.26 years, so 3.25 years, which is pretty amazing. But I think that the finding that was most surprising to many of us, me included, obviously, was that the model could actually predict the self-reported sex of the patient. So this patient was a female, both by prediction and actual. And you can see that for this case, again, we can see the green here in the macula, and then a little bit on the optic nerve. And our team has tried to figure out exactly where the model is looking, but we still don't have a very good answer. That doesn't change the fact that the model actually makes this prediction with very, very surprisingly high, very high accuracy. So all of this is to say that deep learning is a very, very powerful tool. But what if we show it this photo? What will the algorithm say? Or this photo? Or this photo? For all of these, what the algorithm will say is no diabetic retinopathy. So the reason is, even though for all of us, it's very, very clear that this is abnormal. The reason this is what the model will say is, remember, what did we teach it? We taught it only to say no DR, mild DR, moderate, severe, or PDR, right? So the point is that the algorithm will only be as good as what we show it. And this is very, very important. We need to keep it in mind. A few examples for some work that our team has been doing since, focusing on things that we can tell from the photo that we can't otherwise, can't otherwise from the photo. So the deep learning can tell from the photo that humans cannot tell from the photo. So for example, this was a paper that was published at the beginning of 2020, where the model actually predicted the presence of anemia and also predicted level of hemoglobin A1C from a fundus photo. You can see 3 lines here, the red, the blue, and the black. The black is using only metadata. When we say metadata, we mean demographics, so age and sex and BMI and a bunch of other things. Fundus only is only from the photo, and the red one is the combined one. And you can see that from the photo, the model actually achieved a better performance than just using the demographics, and combining demographics and the photo didn't really achieve much benefit. Another nice example is a model that was trained to detect DME from fundus photos, but the ground truth or the label for DME came from OCT. So basically this model can look at a fundus photo, the input to the model is a fundus photo, and with an accuracy of OCT, it can say yes or no DME. This is especially useful when you're thinking about low resource places where this means that a camera with the algorithm can actually replace an OCT, which is much more expensive. On the right here, you see the performance, so the AUC ROC curve. So the curve is the performance of the model, and the dots are what ophthalmologists who look at the photo without looking at the OCT, what was their performance compared to the model. Right now, it's unfair to compare that to the people. It's not to say that ophthalmologists are not good. It's just to show how a model can actually learn from the OCT and then be applied to new fundus photos without OCT. And then an area that we are focusing on, and I don't have a slide about this, but a paper that was published just last week, is all about progression. So this is work that we uploaded to arXiv, the preprint server. And what we do here is we try to to learn from the future. So the model got a photo, a fundus image. This was done using the AREDS dataset for AMD. So the model is getting a fundus photo and a label saying 1 year from now, this patient did or didn't develop neovascular AMD. So using the future to predict the future, not trying to build on what we know today or what happened in the past. The work that I mentioned that I don't have a slide on is for diabetic retinopathy, trying to predict which patients may develop diabetic retinopathy from no diabetic retinopathy to anything mild and above. One of the things that we think of that this can be used for is, let's say, screening programs. Not everybody needs to come every year, right? So that model can actually distinguish between high risk and low risk patients, those who did develop and those who did not develop, that we know already. And then if you can distinguish the high risk and low risk, maybe some people, the low risk can come only once every 2 years, right? And the high risk maybe need to come more than every year. Reminding you, this is people who do not have diabetic retinopathy at the moment. This is about AMD. This was limited data from AREDS, so it's a relatively small data set, but you can see the green has the best performance, and that is the deep learning model. Two quick examples beyond ophthalmology. I hope we're doing okay on time. One is lung cancer. We know that lung cancer is the leading cause of cancer death. So another team on our group was doing the same with CT scans. So trying to train a model to look at a CT scan today and say, will or say whether or not it has that cancer. And this is the model's performance. And if we look at a single individual case, then this is the initial scan. Nothing was found. This is the scan 1 year later that found stage 3 lung cancer. We all know what that means. But when we apply the model that was trained using those CT scans, the model, the original scan, right, from the year before, the one that was interpreted as normal, the model actually thought it saw lung cancer there. So this could be just overlooked by our radiologists, and radiologists, again, have way too much. And this is a very, very difficult case. But if we can use technology to improve and to assist doctors in how they do these mundane tasks, then this could definitely save lives. Another nice example that I really like is because it's showing how AI or machine learning can be used to help doctors. So pathologists usually don't use digitized slides. They actually still use light microscopes. So this is an AI and a deep learning algorithm that was trained on scanned slides, and it's put on the microscope. And as the pathologist is looking through the slide, it highlights areas that it identifies as suspicious. So it's just an assistive tool. I think it's pretty cool. So in general, when we think of machine learning for medicine, I think, or machine learning in general, I think we can think about it in two buckets. One is machine learning is very good to automate repetitive tasks. So these are things that I can do or we can do as doctors, but either are not the best use of our time, or there aren't enough doctors in the world to do them. And then it could also be used to find new signals, things that we can't do, right? Such as signals that we don't even know are existing in the data, or predicting the future and help prevent diseases. Let's switch gears and talk about a little bit more about the technical side. So what does it mean to train a model? And once we've trained a model, how do we know that it actually works? So when we come to apply machine learning to medicine, we use the rule of 3. We need an objective, what is the question that we want the model to answer? What is the task that we want the model to do? We need data. Usually we need lots of it. We need it to be labeled. So we want to know what's in the data, and we want it to be fair and representative of the task that we want the model to do. And we need a model for continuous optimization. like the inception model that we used for the diabetic retinopathy work. So what does that mean? If we want to train a model to say whether there is a dog or a cat in the photo, then we show it lots and lots of photos of dogs and cats labeled accordingly as cats and dogs. And then we show it to the model learns and knows how to say whether it's a cat or a dog. Similarly, we can train a model to say yes or no glaucoma. I'm sure everybody here knows it's not as simple as that. This is a very extreme example. But in principle, we can do the same. So what do we need for a good model? We need high quality data. We want it to be diverse. It has to be relevant. And we need clear grading guidelines for consistent labels. And the way we measure the quality of the labels is by measuring the agreement among graders. And this may not work, but this is from Superman. Yeah, that's okay. The one thing that the team learned and was a bit surprised with during the diabetic retinopathy work is that even with clear guidelines, doctors don't agree with each other and the labels are inconsistent. And this in part was the reason why they needed to grade each image more than once. We call this the rainbow chart. We even have it on a shirt. And on the x-axis are the graders. And then on the y-axis are the different images, different photos. So every row represents the collection of labels that was collected for each image. So you can see there's a lot of disagreement here. I'm just reminding you this was for diabetic retinopathy. What about glaucoma? This is a quote from the US Preventative Services Task Force work about glaucoma screening. Screening for glaucoma is a difficult problem because it is asymptomatic, it has low prevalence, it is typically only slowly progressive, and has no agreed upon standard for diagnosis. So what does the rainbow chart look like for glaucoma? This is from our glaucoma paper. You can see it's very messy. And the only case in this batch that everybody agreed on was a normal nerve. This is just a little bit about how we make sure, or what we do with the work we do in order to get more agreement and better labels. We do this for every work, but I think it's even more important for glaucoma. So the way we do these, we call this adjudication. And the way we do it is that we give each image we give to 3 independent graders. They all look at it separately. And then once they're done, it randomly goes to one of them. And they look at the image again, they look at what they said and what the other ones said. And they have the option to change their mind or adjust their grading. And it goes to all 3. And it can actually go in a loop like this forever until they all agree. We found that this is very useful for situations where, let's say, I don't know how many of you have graded images, but it's a boring task. You get tired and you lose concentration, and at some point you can overlook stuff, especially, when you're grading an optic nerve. So it's very useful when someone is like, oh, I completely missed that notch or that hemorrhage or something like that. But in glaucoma, as we said, this can go on forever. And we saw it go on like 15 times around and around, and people are arguing, there is a notch, I don't see a notch. Yes, the notch is there. No, the notch is not there. So we actually cut it, and we just gave everyone a second chance. And this is just a screenshot of the tool in which this is all done. And you can see these are the different questions. And then doctors can, or graders can all argue in here. So I think our biggest challenge, and as surprising as it may sound, is consistent and accurate labeling. Still, with everything else, getting doctors to agree and give consistent labels is kind of a big challenge. So we're still talking about how we train a model. So let's say we have a data set, and this is again from the diabetic retinopathy work. So we had a big data set, and we split it into development and validation, and we split the development into train and tune. And then we validate, and we use the validation data sets to evaluate how the model is performing. So we trained a model, we split the data, we trained a model. How do we actually know that it works? So the metrics on which we evaluate the model's performance, I'm sure you're all familiar with. We use AUC, area under the curve. We use sensitivity and specificity. These are all nicely visualized on the ROC curve. And we use Cohen's kappa to calculate the agreement between the model and the ground truth. And you can see we do it based on a confusion matrix that is here on the right. And as I said, we have a development test and a test set, and the test set is touched only once. We use it only to evaluate the model's performance. So we use the tune set, which is part of the development set, to see that we're going in the right direction as we do the model training. So we developed the model, we tested it on the test set, and we got an AUC of 0.95. That's pretty good, right? Are we done? We're not done, because we still need to evaluate the result qualitatively. So we need to look at the data and look at the outliers and try to understand, and not only the outliers, but also all the explanation methods that I can explain later. I don't have slides for these, but to see what exactly it is that the model is looking at or try to understand, and then see. So these are two examples from our work. One was that the model might be actually looking at the notch from the camera and then connecting the camera to the site. And different sites have different populations and different even incidence and prevalence of diseases. And this can be throwing the model off. And this is an example of PRP, a patient after a PRP. So this is very easy for the model to pick up, and it can actually skew and bias its results or its performance. Another thing that is really, really important is to see that it generalizes to different populations, different camera types, different geographies. And that's why we try to use multiple data sets from multiple locations and show that it keeps performing on all of these. Another thing that we want to see is whether it works in the wild, in the real world. And for that, we run trials in real screening settings, comparing to humans, comparing to, and figuring out how it works in the real world. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, but also how it integrates into the workflow. That's also very important. And these are just studies that we have running in Thailand and India using our algorithm. And not only evaluating the model's performance in real life scenarios, but also how this integrates into the clinic and how usable the users, the nurses that are using this in this specific program actually think it is. Okay, so validation and generalization are very, very important. Okay, let's finish very quickly with 3 common myths in building and translating AI models. I'm sure you're all aware there are many, many, many papers, if you look on PubMed, that are doing machine learning and many machine learning and deep learning models, doing a bunch of stuff. Explosion of papers in the intersection between healthcare and machine learning. But we don't see many products actually out there that use machine learning. And the question is, why is this gap between expectations and reality? And what are the barriers, right, to actually adopting? So we think there are 3 common myths in building and translating AI models, and let's quickly look at each of them. So one is that more data is all you need for a better model. This is another plot from that same diabetic retinopathy paper, where the team, what they did was they wanted to see if that myth is actually true. So they, out of the 130,000 images, they trained models with different parts of the data or different amounts of images. And as you can see here, at about 55,000, the model's performance actually plateaus. So it doesn't really increase, despite adding more and more data. To add to that, what they did was they wanted to see if the number of grades per image makes a difference. And as you can see here, they took different subsets with different numbers of grades or labels per image. And it seems that on the training set, it's not as important, but the tuning set, the set that is used throughout the development to estimate performance, it actually makes a big difference. So if you are debating where to invest your efforts on higher ground truth, that would be the tune and the test set. And this was done on our team, and then this was published later. A tune set, a subset, was labeled by retina specialists, and the model performance increased when developed with that data. So it's not just about the quantity of the data, it's also about the quality of the data. Okay, an accurate model is all you need for a useful product. So as I mentioned before, we trained a model, it's super accurate, we bring it to the world, and then this nurse says, you know, I can't use it because it's burdensome. It doesn't integrate into my workflow. It's not usable. So in order to assess what is needed and how we can best integrate these kind of algorithms into a clinical workflow, we're running this multi-center study in Thailand, or at least the data has already been collected, and we're now evaluating the performance to see how well it was integrated and what are the learnings. And some of the things that we do is something like this, which is human-computer interaction research. So mixed methods, not the statistical one, but really mixed research methods from a bunch of disciplines to make sure that we can actually make this a real thing in the world. So it's not just the accuracy of the model, it's also the usability. Okay, and myth number 3, we'll finish with that. A good product is sufficient for clinical impact. This photo is a photo of, I think it's Shankara Nethralaya, if you guys are familiar. This is a large eye hospital in India, in Chennai, if I'm not mistaken. And what this comes to represent is that we trained a model and it's very accurate. We made sure it's usable, and the nurses who have to use it or the doctors have to use it are very happy with it. But if patients don't have access to the healthcare system, don't have access to this amazing tool, then we're not going to have any impact on their health. So what is needed in this space is health economics and outcomes research to teach us, or to at least think about how best to integrate machine learning and AI algorithms in the clinic or in the world, in the health system. And this graph on the right is an example from Singapore, the Singapore SERI, Singapore Eye Research Institute group, that they were investigating this exact question, and they compared 3 modes of DR screening in Singapore: a fully automated, only the model; a semi-automated, so human and model together; and a completely human approach. And the interesting part here is that the one that was most cost efficient or cost effective was actually the semi-automated. So not the model alone, but the combination of model and human. So it's not just about a good product, but about how we can impact the system to integrate it. So in conclusion, label quality and ground truth are critical to building accurate models. We need a human-centered approach to build a useful product, and implementation and health economics research are critical for the adoption of AI products in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naama. Thank you very much. It was, for me, it was perfect. I have to, and I would like to invite to start the conversation. Francesca Cordeiro, our next speaker, is also online and had the opportunity to listen to your lecture. And I asked her if she would like to make some questions. If you don't mind, if Dr. Naama Tavares would like to make some questions also. Francesca, thank you very much to accept our invitation. And would you open your camera? Let me see. I cannot see you. Now I can see you. Hi, Francesca. Thank
Hi,
you very
Augusto.
much. I know that's late for you.
Not too bad. It's not too bad at all. I mean, you from Brazil normally start your evening meals at around 10 o'clock at night, don't you? So,
yeah, actually,
I
I don't have even time to have dinners these days.
Oh dear,
but
that's not healthy. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and delighted to meet you, Naama. I've heard your name, never met you before, and I caught most of the talk, and it was really interesting. And as you rightly say, in ophthalmology, AI has grabbed everyone's attention, but the way in which it is done is a little controversial sometimes. And I think the things that you covered are really important for all of us to bear in mind whenever we come across the use of AI. So actually, one of the papers that I thought you may bring up, but I may have missed it if you didn't, was there was a very recent paper in Nature Medicine by DeepMind on use of OCT for predicting wet AMD in fellow eyes. Did you know the one I mean?
Yes. Definitely.
Now, for me, so I'm really a glaucoma person like Augusto, but I'm interested in AMD as well. One of the things that I was surprised about was their definition of accuracy, sensitivity, specificity, and the lack of cognizance of the low positive predictive value that they had in that paper. I just wondered what your thoughts were, bearing in mind that you've given a very comprehensive and unbiased opinion about how people should interpret AI and their usefulness clinically.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, that paper had I think the accuracy of the model, or not accuracy. Whenever I say accuracy, the engineers on the team are upset with me that I say AUC is not accuracy. Was actually not amazing. I think it was
no, it wasn't amazing.
Yeah.
Positive predictive value was something like 13%, but that didn't feature in their comments. So from my perspective, I can understand it was obviously a brand new idea with the use of the AI, though I think there was one other paper that had some similar idea. But it made me think of the process by which they'd got to the stage of publication, when in fact all the three myths that you presented here, they didn't really show any how should I say, knowledge of the fact that they were opening a can of worms with a paper such as this. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on how we can avoid this in the future.
Yes. So I think, well, how do I say this politely?
I was trying to be polite as well.
Yeah. Publishing. So I think let's put it this way. Publishing a paper, unfortunately, is not a testament of this working, right? So we all know anything is publishable, basically, right? You will publish it eventually. I think the real question again, and the real important thing is like what impact will you have, right? What effect will you have, and how you can actually use it, what clinical impact things will have. So on my team specifically, the way we like to think about it is we do whatever original or whatever first stage point proof of concept research, and then once we have a model that, let's say, we think is good enough then we usually like to try a clinical feasibility study, right? So try to test a use case, a clinical use case for that study before we go on and continue investing in the model itself, perfecting the model's performance to 0.99. That's not important, right? Or that's not necessarily the point. Humans don't have 0.99 performance.
Yeah.
I didn't mention, but you know, when I was grading photos, if you asked me before lunch or after lunch,
yeah,
I would probably give a different answer, right? So to me, it wasn't a surprise that labels weren't consistent.
yes.
You can understand that for engineers it wasn't the same, but I agree, and I think unfortunately, I mean, yes, we see papers coming out all the time that actually don't really generalize, right? So probably overfit most of the models that are out there.
Yeah.
So I totally agree. These things need to be but that goes, and I assume many of the people in this room are peer reviewers themselves, right? And get review requests. I think it's which we all do voluntarily, which is a problem. I agree, but because it's, you know, it's voluntary time, but investing in educating ourselves on what's important and you know, what we need to pay attention to when we review, and making a higher standard for what, you know, literature should be in this space. I think it's on us. It's on us and on the editors, but we serve the editors, so.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, though the very first myth you said, I think applies to this case in particular, which is it's not necessarily the numbers, high numbers, because this was an example, I can't remember how many, but it was thousands of scans. And in glaucoma, actually, we're often accused of not having enough numbers. I think when AI is being applied, so we're at the opposite end of the scale. But you can do, I think, a good design on small numbers and a terrible design on large numbers.
Totally agree. I totally agree. And I think in glaucoma, the problem is probably that we don't have good definitions. I think that's a bigger problem. We're not consistent, right? So
yeah. No, I agree. It is something the FDA and NEI said when Bob Weinreb and Paul Kaufman did their endpoints review. There were 2 meetings that were held to try and help us as glaucoma doctors around the world to agree on what can be used as a proper diagnostic tool other than IOP for glaucoma.
Yeah, Bob Weinreb actually told me once, I remember when I was in San Diego, that at least at that point he believed that genomics will help us understand glaucoma better, right? Because glaucoma is a whole host of diseases, right? It's not one disease that we actually don't really understand.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. There's some Portuguese chats that I can't understand. I don't know if you're wanting to ask questions,
no
Augusto.
No problem. Never mind. If I didn't see that, but if you have any questions for you, I can translate. Ivan, do you have any question?
Yes, I have a quick question for Naama. Hello, Naama. Nice to see you again.
Hey, nice to see you. Long time.
We spent 2 or 3 months in San Diego in 2013. Yeah, it's a good time.
It was good times, yes.
Yeah. Great lecture. Congratulations. And
thank you.
Some astonishing information with detection of sex and age and whatever that no one can imagine how these things were detected. And also about labeling and modeling. I believe that your lecture was perfect to describe that, and the discussion now with Francesca Cordeiro about definition of glaucoma and how to label the photos. For example, I also graded a lot of images in San Diego, and we had 50 optic discs to to grade, and we had the adjudication process as well, that I believe I learned a lot with the adjudication process. Right. And the variation, the variability of the optic disc and the optic nerve head, I believe it's also another difficulty part of detection for the IA. I'm not sure. I'd like you to comment on that. But also I would like you to comment on progression, because progression, it doesn't depend so much on labeling, because you have a patient now and within 5-10 years, and you saw that the patient progressed on the optic disc, on the visual field, or the OCT. Do you believe, we have a paper submitted now with a fellow of both of us, me and Felipe, on progression. Do you believe it to be easier or less difficult, a model for progression, for detecting progression?
For your first part about the optic nerve, I agree. I mean, there's so much variability in appearance of optic nerve. Again, the model or a model will only be as good as what we show it. The more we show it, the more examples that we show it, the better it will learn, and the better the quality of the labels, the better it will learn. Definitely. It's just that there's so much variability that it will be difficult to overcome that. And I think that's where collaboration comes in, right? So if there's no doubt there needs to be collaboration among different groups. About progression, so I think that the beauty of the progression work is that, and I think I mentioned it in one sentence, is that we're using we're learning from the future to predict the future, right? So the labels for progression are coming from what actually happened, not an assessment, not an opinion, not a calculator. So, and that's why for glaucoma specifically, I think 2 years follow-up is not enough, right? We will need to do it properly. We'll need like the 20-year follow-up. I don't know if you know Jamie Brandt. Jamie Brandt is a pediatric glaucoma specialist at UC Davis that I worked with for a while. And he was one of the PIs for the OATS study. And a few years ago, they did the 20-year follow-up for the OATS study. And I remember him mentioning, you know, people who came with suspicious discs and their discs look the same 20 years later, right? Who were randomized to like do nothing, and actually nothing happened. And then some people, the opposite, right? We know that glaucoma treatment is not innocent at all. So if we have the data, but this is very, very challenging to get 20 years of data, not only because of the collecting the data, but modalities change, technology changes, right? Practices change. I think that would be ideal. Regarding the labels for progression, again, the label is what we tell the model in relation to the specific photo or the specific image, and if that comes from the actual outcome, then I think that's a good way to look at it. I hope that answers.
Sure, thanks.
Thiago would like to make a question also. Thiago, please.
Hi, Naama. Nice to see you again. Great talk again. So, Naama, we discussed a while when you were in Brazil regarding your glaucoma paper. And I don't remember exactly how you explained that, but as I see in your control group, part of your patients, they are comprised by patients with diabetes, isn't it? In your control group, in the glaucoma paper?
Yes, for a glaucoma paper, yes. Yes, the majority of the data was patients with diabetes.
Yes. And in this context, we know that some patients with diabetes, they might have, RNFL thinning, even without clinically evident diabetic retinopathy. So you may have some controls with RNFL thinning, even without glaucoma due to diabetes. do you think it makes even harder for the algorithm, for the model to differentiate between glaucomatous and control eyes? How do you think it may impact your results?
Yeah, I think it definitely biases the result. I think even more than just the RNFL thing or what you said, some of because and the reason we did it this way is because that's the data that we had, right? So the limitations of the data. So first of all is the RNFL thinning or even RNFL defects, that some of them, are not glaucoma related, are actually diabetes related, and not to mention the hemorrhages, right? So hemorrhages next to the optic nerve, maybe just diabetes, not, but we didn't have good ground truth for this. The ground truth that we had was what our graders, our labelers that looked at the photo, what they saw. That's it. So it's definitely, and just to highlight again, we call it the glaucoma paper. This is not glaucoma. This is glaucomatous optic neuropathy, right? Or it's a risk of or suspicion of glaucomatous optic neuropathy because we had no way of knowing whether this was or wasn't glaucoma, actually, right? So it was just based on. But I totally agree. I think there's definitely we try, or we should, right, as much as we can. And again, especially when we want to bring this to the world and to actually use, it's not just a paper, but actually use it as a product to treat patients or to screen or triage, try to account for all these confounders. Definitely. I mean, it's never going to be perfect, but thank you. That's a very good point.
Once again, congrats on your talk, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I was going very fast because of the technical challenges at the beginning.
No problem. Thank you very much. I appreciate your lecture again. Thank you very much. And one of the interesting tools that you can work on artificial intelligence in glaucoma, it's not just for diagnose, but to help the tools that we have already for diagnose. For example, segmentation, OCT, and also classification in different diagnostic approach, as we can see from the lecture from Francesca Cordeiro. She's using artificial intelligence to help the classification of and to identify the apoptotic cells, and we have the chance to see her talking about artificial intelligence also in her lecture. And in a more pragmatic point of view, I think that artificial intelligence would be very important to do something that we can do that already in our normal practice, and we're not doing. Most of the patients that are coming blind of glaucoma is because something was missed and you make the diagnosis in a very advanced case. And most of the patients had the opportunity to be seen by an ophthalmologist in the past. So, and you have all the tools to make the diagnosis, and we are not doing. Maybe having artificial intelligence, not to differentiate from the beginning, the initial diagnosis, but mostly the moderate to advanced, and not missing the case, I think it would be a very interesting tool for artificial intelligence. Naama, thank you very much for your lecture, and I'm going to ask for our sponsors just a very quick video, and then we start with Francesca. Is that okay for you, Francesca? Okay, thank you very much, Naama. If you want to stay with us, there will be a very, very interesting lecture, and the lecture is, you don't need an OCT anymore. You have better thing than an OCT.
I am very interested. Thank you.
Hello, só um minuto.
Naama, thank you for your presentation. Great talk.
The other sponsor? Outro patrocinador. Bom, enquanto eu estou colocando, eu queria agradecer muito o apoio da Novax e da Adapt. O Ricardo, você coloca o vídeo da Adapt, por favor, um vídeo também rápido de alguns minutos só.
I'm Jonathan Myers. I practice at Wills Eye Institute. I'm part of the glaucoma service there and a service director of the fellowship in glaucoma at Wills Eye Institute. The iSuite progression software helps me to make decisions because it has the trend analysis feature. The trend analysis feature I've found has been very helpful in distinguishing just noise and fluctuation from actual true change. And so the iSuite software allows me to be more confident that what I'm seeing is not actually just a bad day for the patient, but may actually represent true worsening over time. Further, with just the click of a button, one can switch to the cluster trend analysis, where just groups of points that are represented by similar groups of nerve fibers are clustered together and analysis shown of these group points over time. One can then look at the trend over time for, say, the nasal step cluster, the superior arcuate cluster, the paracentral cluster. And again, one can look at the rate of change in decibels per year, as well as the statistical likelihood that this change is actually a true change and not just variability.
Eu vou começar então com... I would like to start with Francesca. Depois, se tiver tempo, a gente coloca esse vídeo. Francesca would give a lecture and then we have time for discussion. Please, Francesca, you share your grade.
Well, can I just start off by saying that the quality of the pharmaceutical films was much better than we have in Europe. So I can see where the budget is going. I think I'd like to see some of those in my some of the conferences that we have here. But firstly, thank you very much, Augustus, for inviting me to present a little bit on the research. And hopefully it follows on quite nicely from that great lecture from Naama. So I will be concentrating mainly on dark, as you can imagine, and I'll try, bearing in mind I'm aware of the timing issues, that I'll try and be quite quick so there's time for questions, and then you all can have an early dinner. So for those of you unfamiliar with the technology, just starting off from basic, this is called DARC, standing for the detection of apoptosing retinal cells. And I first published this back in 2004, and the group of us who were in that first paper still work together now. And it was really based on this idea that in cell biology labs around the world, people were already using this protein called annexin to identify in vitro cells that were undergoing the process of apoptosis. So apoptosis is a form of cell suicide and has for years been seen as an early marker of disease. And what happens is that cells in the earliest stages of apoptosis, and in fact during stress, change their membrane structure. So phosphatidylserine, which normally is in the inner membrane of the cell, translocates to the outside of a cell, indicating that that cell is no longer healthy. It's either stressed or about to undergo apoptosis. And annexin 5, which is an endogenous protein, just has a high affinity to this exposed phosphatidylserine. Now, in cell biology, this was being used by fluorescently labeling the annexin. And so all we did is we took advantage of the fact that the eye was transparent and fluorescently labeled annexin, and basically were able to show that we could detect single cells through this process. And that led us to come up with a whole number of publications, some of which hopefully you all have seen, where we use this technology, DARC, to look at the efficacy of treatments. And most of these have been published in journals looking at efficacy of drugs. And we've, scanned a whole number of things, from glutamate antagonists, from things such as brimonidine, alpha-2 adrenergic agonists, coenzyme Q10, and in other diseases as well, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. But in parallel to this, at the end of that first paper, I did say that actually this could be easily translatable to the clinic. So remember, that paper was published in 2004. We now, in 2020, 16 years later, and the DARC project started officially back in 2008. And it's unique because it is a collaboration between University College London, Imperial College London, the Western Eye Hospital, and all funded through the Wellcome Trust. And most recently, we've had a startup company that's taken over from where the Wellcome Trust left off to allow us to move forwards. So our first paper, so we've managed to get the Wellcome Trust funding to take us all the way from the preclinical stages to the clinical stages. And our phase 1 clinical trial was published in Brain back in 2017. And this was the first demonstration ever of single nerve cells anywhere in the body labeled with annexin 5, undergoing this process of apoptosis. And in that paper, where we looked at patients with progressive glaucoma and compared them to healthy controls, there was evidence that there was increased activity of these 6 cells in the glaucomatous eyes compared to the healthy control. But what was very fascinating with that, very small numbers, these were just 16 patients, 8 had glaucoma and 8 were healthy controls, was the post hoc analysis, which followed those patients up for 18 months, suggested that the DARC count was predictive of those that then went on to develop progression. So at the end of that paper, we said that this could be a promising new retinal biomarker and potentially could be used for looking at early disease, especially glaucoma, but any neurodegenerative process, with a view to looking to see if it could be used for prompt treatment response. And where we were coming from was this. So you will all be aware that the world of biomarkers has really started from the time of the Framingham study, but also in oncology, these are used very often as surrogate markers of a true clinical endpoint. So the best known example would be that stroke. I don't know if there's somebody who's got their mic unmuted, maybe, Carolina? If it's at all possible to, wonderful, thank you. The blood pressure is a good biomarker for stroke. Okay, so the Framingham study showed that those with a high blood pressure went on to develop stroke. And where we were coming from was, could DARC be used as a surrogate endpoint for glaucoma? So that led to our phase 2 study, and that study was much bigger than our phase 1. So in all, we had around 120 patients, of which 40 were controls and 20 had glaucoma. And the primary objective of that was to look at the efficacy of DARC in visualizing these apoptotic and cells that are undergoing stress, but also we were looking for the safety and tolerability. So I mentioned glaucoma and I mentioned healthy controls, but also there were patients that we included in this trial that had AMD, optic neuritis as a result of multiple sclerosis. And as a model of Alzheimer's dementia, we use Down's patients. But I'm only really going to concentrate on the glaucoma and the healthy volunteers. So I would have to let you know that we've only just had our AMD paper accepted. So hopefully you'll hear me talking about that in the future. So in all, there were 113 patients who received DARC. There were very strict inclusion and exclusion criteria. Compared to phase 1, all of these had one single dose, that's 0.4 milligrams of the annexin. We used the ICGA settings of the Spectralis to record images at baseline, 15 minutes, 2 hours, and 4 hours. And we looked only at the central images, which had the optic nerve head and the macula. So in all, we collected 906 anonymized retinal images. And I think you'll have a good laugh following on from Naama's presentation, that what we thought was initially is let's get 5 masked operators to try and do these DARC counts. Okay, so they were asked to go through a selection of the images, in fact all of them, and outline exactly what they would call a spot. And for this they used just the multipoint tool in image J, and they were both, all 5 of them actually underwent this activity on the same screen, on the same computer. They were masked, and there really should have been no variation in terms of the actual images that they saw. However, this is an example from one image of what each observer saw. So remembering that each observer was asked to pinpoint exactly where they thought they could see a white fluorescent spot, which was an annexin 5 positive. So this is observer A, this is observer B, observer C, observer D, and observer E. So they didn't really agree with each other, and they actually didn't agree with themselves. As Naama mentioned, you know, if they were hungry on one day, they might have felt differently from another day. And a way of looking at this is also looking at the total number of spots any of them saw, which is 1 agree. This is where 2 or more observers agreed, and this is where 5 agree. So if you look at this in this way, this is using Krippendorff's alpha, you can see that the agreement was not great. And in fact, looking at the breakdown between observers, you'll see that only half of the spots were seen by more than 2. However, we needed a ground truth, and this is exactly what we decided we were going to be using, where 2 or more observers agreed. But we definitely needed something more rigorous, robust, and objective to define what a dark spot was. So that's what led us on to using AI, and just to show you how these numbers were arrived at. So this is the healthy volunteer group, of which there were 40 healthy volunteers, 80 eyes, finally 73 eyes with good images were used from that group. And in the glaucoma, we had 29 eyes. And all of these glaucoma patients were then followed up for 18 months so that we had progressive data available on these 29. So how was the convolutional neural network trained? Well, one of the things that we were well aware about was this idea of overfitting, and these are small numbers. So what the training was done on was just the control data set and only the spots that were identified. So there were around 50,000 spots that were identified where 2 or more observers agreed. So 50% of those spots were used for training the CNN, and the other 50% were used for testing it. Once that algorithm had been trained and tested to define what a dark spot was, it was then used against the glaucoma patients. So remember, all these patients only had DARC performed once, but they were followed up with sequential OCT scans right up to 18 months later. And we chose as our progression parameter the 18-month 3.5 global retinal nerve fiber layer ring with a significant rate of progression which was greater than aging. So we used more than 1 micron a year to define that as being greater than aging. So this algorithm was tested on these glaucoma patients who were shown to progress according to this criteria or stable according to that criteria. And sorry, I forgot to mention earlier that this AI bit actually came from the startup company Novi, because at that stage we'd finished the Wellcome Trust grant. So this goes quickly through the idea of how the CNN was developed. First, the images were aligned and optimized. A template matching method was used to help define what a candidate spot was. Then they were compared with the 2 agree spots. So the 2 agree are shown in green. The yellow are those that are identified by the candidate template matching approach. And then the CNN was used to try and extract that to define what a spot was. So then you ended up with, using the ground truth, true positives where both the CNN and the 2 agree agreed, and then you can get the false positives, true negatives, and the false negatives. So what this means, this is an example here. This is taken from the paper published earlier this year. In green are the spots that the more than 2 manual observers agreed on, and in blue are the CNN defined spots. So where they overlie is the agreement of the CNN with the 2 agree. So another way of looking at that, so this is an example of a stable eye, one that was shown to be stable 18 months down the line, and this is an example of an eye that was shown to be progressive 18 months down the line. So this is now looking at the stats. If I get you to look at this graph first, what you can see here is actually the area under the curve was just over 0.8, whereas with the CNN, it was better, you'll be pleased to know, at 0.88. And the sensitivity was 85.7 with a specificity of 91.7. So when you compare the CNN dot count to the manual dot count, both of them show that the dot count was significantly higher in the progressive group. But what was interesting, and I think you can see this possibly better in this, is that if you used a cutoff threshold of a dot count of 30, all the eyes that had a dot count greater than 30, so I'm only looking at this greenish rectangle here, all eyes that had a dot count greater than 30 went on to progress 18 months later. And I think that's quite unusual for a biological marker to have a threshold. And in comparison, actually, I should say there was one other parameter that showed a significant difference between the progressive and stable groups. And this is the Bell-Chahan idea of matching Brooks opening sectors with the retinal nerve fiber layer progressing sectors on the OCT. However, there was no ability to separate. There's no separation in that work compared to this, but it did suggest that structurally there was some parallels with that test, which is very good. So in summary then, this is really for the first time describing using artificial intelligence along with the dot count to try and get a robust and more accurate measure of the dot count. And that has then been able to show that the higher dot count significantly was associated with the group of patients with glaucoma that went on to progress 18 months down the line. And the thing that I think is very surprising is that if you set your dot count more than 30, all those patients were able to predict with DARC to show that those were the ones that were going to progress 18 months down the line. So I've skated this and I've gone through this very quickly, partly because I feel sure that it's quite late in the evening now for you guys, but also I think it's a good chance for us all to discuss and hopefully have a healthy discussion of where we are in terms of glaucoma.
Okay, thank you very much, Francesca. I have to apologize because we put the wrong video for the sponsor. I have to put the right video for the sponsor, and then it's a 1 minute video, and we start our discussion. Ricardo, você coloca o vídeo, por favor?
Okay.
I'm Jonathan Myers. I practice at Wills Eye Institute. I'm part of the glaucoma service there and a service director of the fellowship in glaucoma at Wills Eye Institute. The iSuite progression software helps me to make decisions because it has the trend analysis feature. The trend analysis feature I've found has been very helpful in distinguishing just noise and fluctuation from actual true change. And so the iSuite software allows me to be more confident that what I'm seeing is not actually just a bad day for the patient, but may actually represent true worsening over time. Further, with just the click of a button, one can switch to the cluster trend analysis, where just groups of points that are represented by similar groups of nerve fibers are clustered together and analysis shown of these group points over time. One can then look at the trend over time for, say, the nasal step cluster, the superior arcuate cluster, the paracentral cluster. And again, one can look at the rate of change in decibels per year, as well as the statistical likelihood that this change is actually a true change and not just variability.
Bom, a DAP de forma acertada, ela é o representante do campo visual do Octopus, e a opção que eles fizeram foi divulgar o campo visual, acho isso bem interessante. E queria agradecer de novo o patrocínio da ADAPT. Francesca, I have some questions. Well, I know what you're doing for a long time, and I'm very excited with the idea of this approach that you can see the damage in the cell and predict the progress before the OCT. Is 18 months. It's a long period that you can see in advance. It's very interesting for me. How do you feel that imagine the best scenario that it works very well, and soon we're going to have this in our office. How do you feel it to be the practice with this approach? Every 6 months, every year, you're going to decide this for each patient and see if it's a fast progress, it's not a fast progressor. Do you think that this would be interesting for, it's so many cases that you can use, for example, for ocular rehabilitation patient that we just fall to see something change in OCT, and then we can see if it's something that's already happening. And the other question that I think that's one of the most interesting way is to evaluate neuroprotection. So I would like to hear your opinion on that, please.
Yes, so there's lots of questions there. So I'm going to try and answer all of them. So the first thing is the applications you can think of in 3 different ways. One is monitoring, one is diagnostic, and one is screening. So they all have their own ways within our clinic. Monitoring, if you are sure somebody has glaucoma, it basically allows you to be sure that your treatment is working faster than I think is currently possible. So we all put our patients on drugs which lower the intraocular pressure. They come back 6 weeks, and then 3 months and 6 months, yeah? And then maybe, if you're lucky, 1 year later, before you really know whether or not your treatment is working. And I suppose what DARC is offering you is that within a month of starting your treatment, as long as your PK is well known, is you will know whether or not you are on the correct treatment within that time frame. And you can swap it to a different one and actually have much better and greater confidence that your treatment is working in a much narrower time than is currently possible. And so you may never have to wait for your OCT to change or even for your visual field to change, because you will know you've got your patient on the correct treatment in a much smaller period of time. And then how you may not even need to monitor them yourself, because that then goes on to the next thing, which would be screening and monitoring in the community, because at the moment this is an intravenous injection, but we have already come up with a nasal inhalation solution, which means that actually you could get anybody who can do a scanning laser ophthalmoscope or a fundus camera could take a picture and give you an idea as to whether the patient is still well controlled disease activity wise. And that gets onto the screening idea, which means that your high street optician, and I'm not sure what the setup is in Brazil, but most of the primary care in this country, in the UK, is done by our optometrists and our opticians. And they would not be able to do an intravenous injection, but they could do a nasal inhalation test. And that will allow them to be able to take over that side of care. It also is this thing you brought up with OHT, ocular hypertension, and this group of patients we are sworn to in our clinics, these glaucoma suspects that we keep bringing back because we're never quite sure whether they've got the disease, but we're not comfortable enough to discharge them just in case they develop it, yeah? So the two, OHT and glaucoma suspect, to me are in a similar boat, because DARC would allow you to say, yes, they do have active disease, and yes, I should treat them. Or with my ocular hypertensive, in the US, somebody mentioned that this, and I don't want to actually offend my American colleagues here, but there's a defensive type of management that's done over there, which is because you don't want somebody to come back and say, look, you told me I had a high pressure and I was discharged, but you could have treated my pressure, and looks what's happened now. They will treat rather than carry on monitoring just in case that patient was to develop glaucoma. And that would be another area that DARC could come into. However, in terms of diagnosis, we aren't there yet with DARC, and I'm the first to acknowledge that we need to do a proper phase 3 trial where we will match the current gold standards on patients that are treatment naive and are newly diagnosed, and follow them up and actually prove that DARC can actually diagnose disease before the current gold standards of visual field and OCT. And the last thing you brought up was neuroprotection. And as you know, this is the real reason I've been pursuing DARC for so long, because all of us are really the heart-sick patient who comes to see you because you've thrown everything at them, all IOP lowering drops, medicines, laser, surgery, and they're still losing their vision. And so that group of patients we all know would be the ones that would benefit from neuroprotection. But what is there, and how can you test for neuroprotection? And this again is where I think DARC will allow the development of neuroprotective drugs in the future to come through. And in fact, as the company Novi is coming out and actually providing a service, one of the things that they are doing is trying to be biomarkers for drugs in the neuroprotective arena, because FDA and MHRA have already approved DARC as an exploratory endpoint for testing efficacy of glaucoma neuroprotective drugs.
Great. Without waiting 10 years to evaluate with 10,000 patients, it's perfect. I didn't know that they approved this endpoint. It's very
exploratory,
nice
as an exploratory, yeah. Endpoint.
Okay, great. It's very nice to know that. Ivan, do you have any questions?
Oh, yes. Great talk, Francesca. Thank you very much. And it's a really exciting topic and diagnosis model. We all know that glaucoma has a characteristic, the fluctuation, the short-term and long-term fluctuation. And probably the cells and the ganglion cells are suffering more or less according to the IOP and the other factors. And have you noted, have you studied yet variability and fluctuation in this model, in this diagnosis technique?
So it's a great point. And I've mentioned that all the patients so far have only had DARC once. However, in January 2021, COVID permitting especially, the plan is we are going to be doing the retest in patients, and also looking at a group of stable and a group of progressing patients to check the variability. Now, you may notice that whenever I talk about DARC, I mention disease activity, not stage of disease, because I think this fluctuation makes it quite difficult to say definitely a high DARC count is advanced. I don't agree with that. I think it's the state of that patient at the time may be very different from the stage of their disease. And therefore, I think DARC is much more an indicator where it gives you a snapshot of the patient's disease activity at the time they're imaged, as opposed to how bad their disease is. And I, I'm quite careful about trying to differentiate between the two.
Okay, thanks.
I have to say something very quickly in Portuguese. O nosso patrocinador, a Novartis, ele pediu para reforçar uma coisa que é importante. Todos os produtos da Novartis para glaucoma, a Travatan, Duotravatan, Simbrinza, estão regularmente no mercado. Então, só para reforçar essa ideia. Francesca, Thiago, do you want to make any question?
Yes, a very, very quick one. So, Francesca, congratulations on your talk. We talked before about your research line. I'm very fascinated about it, and I've been talking about it to my patients for at least 3 years, and we are all anxious to have it commercially available. But it's a quick question. Imagine you have a patient, a glaucoma suspect, okay, and with a slightly abnormal DARC count. And how would I differentiate early glaucoma, thinking about diagnosis, early glaucoma from aging, from like normal aging process in a patient like with 75 years old or something like that?
So we are hoping with the AI to give you a formula to work that out. So we haven't published on that yet, but you're absolutely right. Aging does have an effect. And, we all know that aging retinal ganglion cell loss is 0.4% per year. And we know in glaucoma, it's supposed to be 10 times greater, 4% per year. So I think the measure of the DARC activity would be have some influence on normal aging. But in a disease situation, that activity should be much greater. And whatever threshold we set for that specific age, it has to take into account what one expects for normal aging.
So most likely for a patient with stable glaucoma, you would have like different cutoffs based on age, yes?
Absolutely. The other thing that we are also looking at is the spatial distribution. because the reason why we have our optic nerve cupping, is because of the papillomacular bundle and the typical range, there is we don't have enough patient points to be absolutely sure, but the distribution of where we see the dark cells appears to follow that same sort of pattern, and that can also be different from what you expect with aging.
Okay, so it's a very, very interesting point. Okay, I remember, I think in your 2017 paper, there was a week, but there was a correlation between age and dark cell counts in your healthy volunteers, yes?
That's right, there was, yes. But I think I can only say watch this space because we have some interesting results still to come out.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. I have a practical question for you. Do you use the Heidelberg SLO to make your measurements? Is that correct?
We do, but we could use other machines.
Oh, that's
we haven't tried it, yeah.
It's the most expensive one. That's why I'm asking if the normal angiography would be able to evaluate in the same way as the scanning laser from the Heidelberg.
So in fact, I've just put in a grant application today, specifically to look at different machines, just because I agree with you, Augusto. When we thought about the fluorophore being at the same wavelength as ICG, it was specifically to make this technology accessible to people. And we really don't want to constrain it just to one machine. We want to actually apply it to all machines that can do ICGA. But obviously we need to prove that it works with these other machines first.
If you can make it working with nasal isolation in a chip machine, this would be something that people are going to do most of the time that they enter in the office, because you're trying to avoid everything that would make it difficult and expensive. It's very interesting. It's very, very good to know that.
Absolutely. So to be fair, I've been in the early stages of discussions with people like Zeiss and Topcon and Optos, and even Nikon. So we really are trying to make this accessible to everybody.
Carolina, do you want to make any question?
I just want to say just a quick question, Francesca. Thank you so much for your talk. It's a great honor to having you here with us. And I'm very happy to know that you believe and you have a direction in terms of neuroprotection, because every time when we talk about our studies related to brain disorders in glaucoma, many people ask us or ask to someone else about neuroprotection. Many people don't believe in neuroprotection, so maybe your studies will help us to elucidate this topic. Thank you so much. And just a quick question, Francesca, in terms of glaucoma and other disorders, when a patient has glaucoma and another disease, for example, in the fundoscopy, is it possible to distinguish? Do you think it's possible to distinguish, thinking as the same line as Thiago asked about aging and glaucoma?
Yeah, so that's you both made very good points there. So I think with confidence, we can actually only say 2 diseases at the moment we are convinced about have these characteristic patterns of spatial patterns. One is glaucoma, one is age-related macular degeneration. My gut feeling is Alzheimer's and Parkinson's will show a much more diffuse dark sort of pinpointing around the retina, but I can't be sure of that until we look at more patients. For MS, because it's optic neuritis, I'm expecting it to be focused on where you would expect the majority of retinal ganglion cells to be. But I think ultimately, my idea in the long run would be that you start off with a nasal inhalation of dark, and then that's your first tier. Then your second tier, if there's an abnormality that doesn't fit into 2 or 3 different spatial distributions, you would perhaps have a second lot of investigations. For example, curcumin, which would give you an idea of whether somebody had A beta plaques in the retina, and something similar for alpha-synuclein in Parkinson's. So you would end up with different grades of fluorescent markers that could be used as a cocktail. But to start off with, the easiest one would be dark, to discover whether you were normal or abnormal.
One thing that I think it'd be a very interesting patient to be seeing is the high myopia. High myopia is a huge problem for OCT, for visual field, to evaluate the op nerve with retinography. So if you have a tool that you can see, well, this is a high myopia patient with, well, many of them, they don't even need to be high pressure. So
that's a really very good idea, actually, because that is always a diagnostic problem for us, isn't it? High myopes and glaucoma in particular are a nightmare. But yeah, I'm going to see if I can get a subgroup of those. Maybe when we do a collaboration, Augusto, are there lots of high myopes in Brazil?
We do have a lot of high myopias, and we are trying to work together for a long time. Maybe this time with this subgroup it's going to work.
Absolutely.
Well, anybody else that, I don't know if Naama is still with us, if she want to do make any question. No, she's not with us anymore. Thiago, Ivan, Carolina, can we finish it? Okay.
Oh, right, Francesca. On time.
On time.
Very good. Yeah. 2 hours. Well done.
Francesca, next year we're gonna have our big meeting in Brazil. It's it will be. We don't know how it's gonna be. It's the middle of the year, and we will be very happy to have you with us. It's a meeting for 2,000 people usually, and we hope that's gonna keep this way for next year. And I really appreciate if you can share your results with us next year in July. I will do a formal invitation for you. But I think that what you're doing is a change of the way we evaluate the patient with glaucoma, the way we save. I imagine the future that we're gonna say, you know, your OCT is stable, the visual field is stable, but the amount of ganglion cells that are dying is very high, so now we need to do the surgery anyway, or everything is okay because the amount of ganglion cell that's dying is not high, it's normal, and the new generation gonna start to discuss and to show the patients not just the visual field, but the amount of ganglion cells in irreversible apoptosis. And I think this is very interesting. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the exceptional lecture. I really appreciate that. This will be recorded in our site, and most of the lectures we present again and again. So it will be a very interesting way to everybody in Brazil to know what you're doing. And congratulations on your exceptional work.
Thank you very much. And I think Remo is somewhere there, so I'll say hello to Remo as well. And many thanks, Augusto. Look forward to working with you properly.
Thank you very much.
Okay, take care, everybody.
I'm gonna close now. Thank you. Have a good night. Boa noite para todos. Bye.